Hello and welcome to more history stuff. Now in my last video I spoke a bit about a new book I've got coming out on the 31st of March, published by Pen and Sword, titled Rebellion Against Henry III, the Disinherited Montfortians, 1265 to 74. And I described what the book was about, the general subject matter, that sort of thing. Now I want to make a few videos about individual themes and personalities that are included in the book. And I want to start off with a chap named Adam Gurdon, who most of you might not have heard of, but he was a bit of a celebrity of his day. He was one of the leading lights among the Disinherited. Now this video is titled Outlaw Knight, which is quite self-explanatory, and that is what Adam was. He was a Knight of Hampshire who leads a rebellion first in Dorset, not in Hampshire, and then becomes the leader of a band of outlaws who rove about this part of the country. And he becomes reasonably famous. He's quite similar to Robin Hood in many respects. There are several similar figures among the Disinherited whose actions and deeds might well have at least partially inspired the legend of Robin Hood. And that might be something I'll talk about in another video. But Adam is very interesting, I think, because before he becomes an outlaw, he's already had a very active career for over 20 years. And when the Civil War blows up in England in the mid-1260s, he's not a young man, well into middle age. So I thought it worth exploring his background and his origins before getting on to what he actually does as an outlaw. Adam is probably born about 1220. We don't know his exact birth date, but that's his most sort of probable time of birth. Knighted while young, as most men of his class were, and then embarked on quite an active military career during the reign of Henry III. He first serves in Poitou in southern France in 1242. This is one of Henry's territories in France that have been lost to the French, and in 1242 the king goes over there with an army to try and get it back. Without going into any sort of detail, the campaign is a complete disaster. Henry and his allies end up being chased in circles by King Louis, King of the French, and this will not have been a very positive or heartening experience for someone like Adam, who has, as far as we know, no military experience up to this point. So this is his first campaign, and it ends in a complete rout. It's a catastrophe. So that's got to be a tough experience for him. And then about 10 years later, he serves in Gascony in southwest France, when Henry is again obliged to lead an army personally over to France to try and sort out problems in Gascony, which is his duchy, and is in a state of rebellion. This is much more successful than Poitou. Henry performs much better on this occasion and deals with all the problems. And Adam will presumably come away from it having had a much more sort of positive experience. And then 3 years later, he's called up again. No rest for the wicked. And this time he had to serve in North Wales in 1257. Unfortunately, this is another failure of a campaign. Henry's army is attacked by dysentery as it advances west into North Wales. The weather is appalling, the supplies break down, and Henry gets as far as Deganwy, a castle about midway through North Wales, near the River Conwy, and then decides to turn back because the whole thing is a shambles. It's not working, his army's falling apart, and he sort of has to retreat all the way back to the border. Adam is probably about 30 years old at this point. He would be already a fairly hard-bitten soldier, and he's endured some tough experiences, very sort of mixed success. Unfortunately, we don't know what he did as an individual on all these campaigns. We only know that he took part because his name appears on the surviving muster rolls. But presumably he was regarded as being competent, because otherwise he wouldn't have been repeatedly summoned to serve in the army. So that's what he does as a soldier. But then in 1255, in between the wars in Gascony and Wales, he makes a very good marriage. He marries Constance Venus, and I'm reading from my notes here as I normally do. And this is a very smart match because Adam isn't born into any great wealth. His father leaves him one manor, the manor of Holt, I think it was, in Hampshire. So he's just, in social terms, he's a sort of lower ranking member of the gentry. And of course he, like all such men, he wants to get more lands, more money, more power, climb up the social ladder a little bit. And this is what he manages to do when he marries Constance. This brings him some very rich estates in Hampshire, Dorset and Gloucestershire. And so that's a good match for him. He's done well there. He's also managed to forge links with two very important men. These are Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, and Roger Mortimer, Lord of Wigmore. In 1257, during the otherwise disastrous Welsh campaign, Adam actually serves in Mortimer's retinue, and he's part of Mortimer's following. So they're quite close. Adam is not only a king's knight, but he's forged a personal connection with Roger Mortimer, who's a very important lord of the Welsh March, this very turbulent border region between England and Wales. And just to give an idea of just how difficult this campaign in North Wales is, I thought I'd read out part of a chronicle entry, which it's Matthew Paris, one of the main English chroniclers of the day, and he gives a very sort of vivid account of this war and the problems that Henry and his army have to endure. So he says, however, at the end of the season of autumn, with the shortening of the days in wintertime and the coming of the cold, when increased prices threatened to violently overcome the army of the king, on the advice of his council, who were sick from enduring such fasting, returned from the marches of Chester to London to take part in the translation of the Feast of St. Edward on the 13th of October. But Llywelyn himself for a long time followed them, to see if anybody was detached or fell behind from the royal army, and then these were taken and killed. And thus the inglorious king, his treasure much squandered, laughed at and mocked by the enemy, returned to his own land. Truly he marched well amongst his elegant army, with his royal banner briskly unfurled to arouse them, encouraging his men that the Welsh, the dregs of men, might be slaughtered. So that's Paris for you. I have to admit, I personally find Matthew Paris quite irritating. He's a sort of medieval tabloid hack. He constantly exaggerates. There's one quite amusing incident in his career when the king, Henry III, actually asks to see Paris's chronicle, and this sends him into a blind panic. He goes into a right old flap and has to very quickly rewrite and redact parts of this chronicle before he can show it to the king, because he's been so critical of Henry and he never expected that the king would actually ask to read it. And just from reading out that short snippet, there's lots to pick out from it. The English army, bear in mind that Adam is among them, clearly suffering from the bad weather in North Wales, which is quite typical, but also food prices are rising, which suggests that the supply system is broken down. Again, this is something that happens quite often to English armies in Wales, because the Welsh are very good at cutting off their supply lines. And it also says that Henry's own councillors were sick, they were ill because they had fasted too much, they weren't able to get enough food. So if Henry's own nobles are suffering from starvation, you can imagine what's happening to the ordinary soldiers. And then on his way back to England, Henry's army is tracked by the Welsh, and any stragglers are picked off and killed. And when the army finally struggles back to the border, it's in quite a bad state. I mean, Paris at the end, he contradicts himself. He describes Henry as inglorious. He's lost all his treasure, and the Welsh are laughing at him as he stumbles back to England. But then Paris immediately changes his tune and says that Henry is marching well amongst his elegant army. Well, to judge from the previous description, there's nothing especially elegant about the army when it gets back to England. It's in a hell of a state. But that's Paris for you, as I say, and you just have to imagine Henry's knights, somebody like Adam Gurdon, enduring all these problems, all these privations. But Adam is lucky. He's one of the lucky ones. He manages to get back to England. He survives this ordeal. And from this point on, he is gradually drawn into the political disruption and the arguments going on in England. And this is because he's already forged this connection with Simon de Montfort. And when he's got basically two lords at the moment, Simon de Montfort and Roger Mortimer. And when Mortimer chooses to desert Simon in 1263, Adam chooses to stay loyal to Simon de Montfort. And by this point, England is essentially in a state of civil war. Adam has decided to stay loyal to Montfort, which means that he is now an enemy of the king. He's broken his homage and his fealty to King Henry. He's broken with Roger Mortimer, and he's decided that he's made this decision that he's going to be a loyal follower of Simon. So that takes him up to the cusp of the Civil War period. So I think I'll just stop there for now. Hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea of Adam and the early part of his career and what sort of a man he was. As I say, unfortunately, there's not much detail at this point of his personal activities. His name just crops up on these very bare, dry records, and you basically have to sort of fill in the gaps and imagine the rest. Which is why I read out the piece from Matthew Paris to give you an idea of what Henry's men were suffering in North Wales in 1257, and of course Adam was among them. So I'll stop it there for now, and hopefully you found that reasonably interesting, and I'll speak to you again later.